The wind had teeth. It bit into cloaks and skin, slithered through Winterfell's broken stonework like a ghost half-remembered, and moaned its sorrow through the empty godwood as though the old gods themselves lamented the slow crawl of spring. Snow still clung to the shadowed crevices of the battlements. Ice crusted the iron hinges of the inner gates, and from the north came the chill, ever-patient, ever-present, like a promise unbroken. Jon Snow leaned on the parapets of the east wall with his gloved hands resting lightly on the frost-crusted stone. Below, the courtyard bustled with clanking practice swords and the barking of Ser Roderick as boys danced the dull rhythm of steel on steel. Ghost, white as the frost clinging to the ramparts, paced in silence just behind him, red eyes fixed not on the courtyard but on the tree-line beyond. The boy's eyes weren't on the boys sparring either. He was watching the road. There were many roads to Winterfell, stone-paved, muddy, ancient. But the one that cut through the Wolfswood was the most seldom used, avoided by travelers save for those too reckless or too poor to fear bandits and worse. And it was there, a day ago, that the guards had seen a figure in crimson riding alone. Jon didn't know why he was watching. Perhaps it was because the man was strange, and strange things seldom made it north of Moat Cailin. Perhaps it was because Maester Luwin's eyes had narrowed ever so slightly when the red-robed traveler had asked for hospitality. Not demanded, but asked in a voice that reminded Jon of fire cracking in a hearth at midnight. Or perhaps it was because of the dream, the one he hadn't told anyone about. The dream where a shadow moved across the sky, vast and black, blocking out the sun, and he could not run because his feet were buried in ash. The Red Priest, if that's what he truly was, had given no name. He had arrived with nothing but a staff of black oak and a satchel of strange-smelling herbs slung across his shoulder. The gatekeepers had opened for him warily, and he had bowed, not grandly like a king, but deeply with a gravity that made old men nod in turn. He had not preached. He had not spoken of R'hllor, or fire, or sacrifice, or even prophecy. When Maester Luwin asked who had sent him, he had simply replied, "The Lord of Light guides those who walk alone." Now he lingered, spoke gently with Bran in the garden, watched the blacksmith work the forge, sat in silence through supper with a faint smile on his lips. He had said nothing that might offend Stark honor. And yet Jon could not rid himself of the feeling that something ancient had followed the man into Winterfell. It wasn't until the raven flew in from the south that the stillness broke. "Jon." Arya's voice pierced the wind like a blade, sharp and unbidden. She was halfway up the steps of the wall before he turned to see her, cheeks flushed and breath steaming from the run. She looked pleased about something, which meant trouble. "They're coming. King Robert and the Queen. Father says we must be on our best behavior." Even Sansa's in a flutter. Jon's eyes dropped to the tree line again. "I know. Do you think he'll see us?" she asked, coming up beside him. "The king, I mean. You're his nephew, aren't you?" Jon said nothing for a moment. He looked down at Ghost, whose ears twitched in quiet suspicion. "I'm not sure I'm anything," he muttered. Arya frowned. "That's stupid." He gave a dry laugh. "Tell the Queen that." Arya didn't answer. She was staring out across the courtyard now, toward the old well where the Red Priest sat beside Rickon, who tugged curiously at the tassels of the priest's cloak. The priest let him, smiling as though the boy were a kitten. "He's nice," she said. Jon turned. "Who?" "The Red Man. He doesn't talk funny like Maester Luwin says the Southerners do. He told me a story about a knight who was made of glass. He shattered when he lied." Jon's brow furrowed. "He told you that?" Arya nodded. "Said there's always someone watching even when you don't think so. The glass knight said he never had anything to hide, but when the fire touched him, it burned straight through." Jon said nothing. The wind picked up again. By the next morning, the royal party was drawing near. Scouts returned from the King's Road reporting the banners of House Baratheon and Lannister visible on the horizon. Servants hurried like ants throughout the keep. Robb was already dressed in a doublet that bore the dire wolf of Stark with silver stitching, and even Theon had found time to polish his boots. Jon stood off to the side as the household gathered in the courtyard. He wore black, as always, though the stitching on his collar had been redone by Old Nan to resemble tiny snowflakes. Ghost paced at his side. Ser Roderick had frowned at the direwolf's presence, but Jon had said nothing, and no one pressed it. The Red Priest was nowhere to be seen. "Perhaps he's hiding from the Queen," Theon had joked, brushing ash from his sleeve. "Or perhaps the fire god doesn't approve of incestuous monarchs." Robb had shot him a warning glance. Jon just watched the road. The royal procession arrived in great fanfare. with trumpets and golden banners and knights whose armor had never tasted real blood. King Robert looked older than John had imagined, broader, heavier, with lines carved around his mouth like battle scars won from too much wine and not enough sleep. But his voice was loud and his embrace to Lord Eddard genuine. The Queen, Cersei Lannister, looked carved from ice. She wore her power like a blade and smiled as though each word were a courtesy she despised. John caught her gaze once as he stepped back from the line. It passed over him like cold wind over a grave. The Red Priest did not attend the greeting. Later, as feasts were prepared and Ned led Robert through the crypts, John found himself walking the edge of the Godswood. The trees were quieter here. Even Ghost walked behind him rather than beside. The snow fell lightly, sticking in his hair, and the air carried a strange scent. Pine and smoke, but older, deeper, as though the forest were remembering something it had long buried. He found the Red Priest seated beneath the weirwood, eyes closed. "You didn't come," John said. The priest opened his eyes slowly. They were the color of burnt amber. "The flames told me nothing worth seeing." John frowned. "You don't like them? The Lannisters?" The priest smiled, the corners of his mouth curling without joy. "Some flames burn for themselves. Others only mimic light to draw the moths closer." John sat down slowly, cross-legged in the snow. Ghost remained near the edge of the clearing, tail low. "Why are you here?" John asked. "You never said." The priest looked up toward the canopy of pale leaves above them. "Do you believe that some men are born beneath storms?" John blinked. "What? There are those who walk in rain all their lives," the priest said, never knowing they are wet until the fire comes. Fire dries them, warms them, but fire also reveals what clings to the skin. John watched him, uncertain. "You sound like someone who's lost something." The priest's gaze lowered slowly to meet his. "I watched a mountain crack. I saw its bones bleed black. I saw wings that once broke the world stir again in the ash." John's breath caught. "What do you mean?" The priest looked past him, toward the horizon. "There is a tale," he said softly, "whispered in the free cities. A madman, half-starved, came stumbling out of the smoking sea last moon turn. He spoke of a shadow that swallowed the sky. Said he saw a beast blacker than night rise from the boiling depths and fly west, its roar like the end of the world." John felt the hair on his arms rise. "No one believed him," the priest said, voice distant. "They threw him in a cell. Said he drunk seawater or eaten cursed roots. He screamed about the sun being eaten." John swallowed. "Do you believe him?" The Red Priest turned back to him. "There are older fires burning, Snow. Some that do not need permission to return. Some whose purpose has not yet been revealed." John stood slowly, unsure why the weight of the man's words felt like chains. "And you think that has something to do with me?" "I think the cold winds are stirring again," the priest murmured, "and something old has woken beneath them." John looked to the sky, but there were only clouds. No shadows. No wings. Not yet. The next morning came silver and quiet. Pale sunlight cut across the rooftops like the edge of a forgotten sword. A dusting of snow had fallen overnight, settling on the boughs of the godwood trees, on the heads of statues in the crypts, and in the silence between breaths. John awoke before the bells. Ghost stood at the window, nose against the cracked shutter, his white fur catching the morning light. The dire wolf was utterly still, too still. When John swung his legs over the side of the bed, Ghost did not look back. He rose, dressed without speaking, and followed. They moved through Winterfell like phantoms, past the servants lighting hearths, past old Nan muttering to herself as she steeped her herbs, past Maester Lewin, who stood reading a raven scroll with pursed lips and didn't notice them. Down stone stairs. Beneath the archways still hung with icicles. Across the courtyard where the first sun caught on Theon's polished blade as he practiced alone, frowning at his form. They reached the godwood and stepped into shadow. John expected the Red Priest would be there again. Seated beneath the weirwood, as he often was, silent, unmoving, watching. But the glade was empty. Ghost sniffed the ground once, then looked toward the far trees. John followed. They passed beneath boughs so thick the wind could not reach them. The snow here was old, unmelted, and undisturbed, save for a faint set of prints trailing through the brush, human, booted but light, as if whoever had passed this way left no weight behind. After some time, they came upon him. The Red Priest stood at the edge of a shallow pool where the spring melt had filled a natural basin between the roots of the old trees. He was barefoot, boots set aside, standing in the water, eyes closed. His robes were soaked to the hem, the crimson fabric darkened nearly black. In his hands he held a small wooden bowl, and in it a flame danced, unquenched by the mist. John stopped at the edge, unsure whether to speak. Ghost growled low in his throat, but the priest didn't move. The flame pulsed. John stepped forward. "I dreamt of the crypts," he said quietly. "I was walking them alone, but they were different, wet, cold, and the statues of the kings of winter were weeping. Blood, not water." The priest opened his eyes. He did not look surprised. "The dead do not weep," he said, "but their bones remember." "What does that mean?" John asked. The priest stepped from the pool, barefoot in the frost. "It means the North is not finished with you, Jon Snow." By midday, the royal feast preparations were well underway. Servants bustled through the halls like bees in a hive, carrying trays of roasted game and honeyed roots, kegs of strong ale and sour Dornish wine. Cersei walked through the great hall like a queen of ice, commenting on the thread count of the banners. Sansa followed her like a shadow. Jon wasn't invited. He stood beside the training yard, watching Robb spar with Jory Castle while Bran cheered from the fence. Even Rickon tried to copy the swordplay with a wooden stick, and Arya jeered at Theon from across the way. But Jon only stood, half in shadow, half out. The Red Priest joined him in silence. "You don't eat," Jon said. "I have eaten fire," the priest answered softly. "Meat holds little meaning after that." Jon looked at him, uncertain if he was being serious. "You don't talk like most men." "I'm not most men." Jon almost smiled at that. The priest watched the sparring with mild interest. "He's good," he said of Robb. "He works harder than the rest." "He'll need to," the priest said. "The wolf must be strong to bear the shadow's weight." Jon turned. "What does that mean?" The Red Priest did not answer. That night, the wind rose again. Jon lay awake in his chamber, staring at the ceiling as the walls creaked and the rafters moaned. Ghost curled beside the door like a silent sentry. In the hearth, the fire had burned low, and its last flickers cast strange shapes on the stone. He thought of the Mad Ant from the priest's story, the shadow over the sea, the black dragon that could block out the sun. He thought of the crypts and the dreams. The feeling that something was watching. That something was stirring beneath the stones of Winterfell. At some point, he must have slept. He awoke in darkness. But it was not the darkness of night. It was darker, thicker. The fire had gone out. The room was colder than it should have been. And there was no sound, no wind, no creaking wood, no whisper of fur against stone. Only breath. His own, ragged, in his throat. And another. Deeper. Slower. Like the exhale of a dying god. He stood. Ghost was not by the door. The room felt wrong. Wider. Too wide. He turned and found himself not in his chamber, but in the crypts. The torches flared as he passed. One by one, he walked between the statues of kings long dead. Brandon the Builder. Theon Stark. Cregan Stark. Their eyes followed him. Down he went. Farther than the crypts should go. At the end of the path, there was no statue. Only a great wall of obsidian, smooth and cold. Carved upon it were words he could not read. He reached out. The stone burned his hand. And then the ground trembled. Behind the wall, something moved. Something vast. He heard chains groan. Heard a sound like wings unfolding. And then a voice. Not his. Not human. Not whole. It spoke without sound, thunder in the marrow of his bones. "Do you know who you are?" Jon's breath caught. "Do you know whose blood burns in your chest?" And then the wall cracked. Just a sliver. A single golden eye stared back. It was not human. And Jon screamed. He awoke tangled in his sheets, sweat freezing on his back, the room alight with early dawn. Ghost stood by the bed, teeth bared, ears flat. There was a knock at the door. He rose, chest heaving, and opened it. The Red Priest stood outside, hand already raised. "You heard it," he said simply. Jon nodded. "Then it's begun." By the afternoon, King Robert had grown tired of courtesies and tours. He asked for strong ale, and when it came, he drank deeply. Ned followed him through the godwood as the king rambled of old wars and older regrets. Jon watched from a distance. The Red Priest stood by the heart tree. He was not praying. He simply stared at the bloody face carved in the bark as though waiting for it to blink. Jon approached quietly. "I saw it," he said. The priest turned. "What did you see?" "An eye. A wall of black stone. A shadow that moved like wings." The priest nodded slowly. "Then the gate has opened." Jon frowned. "What gate?" The priest looked up. "There are places where the dead do not sleep, where heat still rises from the bones of gods long gone, Roller sees them. But he is not the only one. Jon swallowed. You think it's real? The dragon. The priest's eyes shone faintly like coal catching a spark. It was never truly dead. Only sleeping. Jon stepped back. Why tell me this? The priest stepped forward. Because you are the one it calls to. I'm not, Jon began. You are more than a bastard, the priest said, voice low and sure. You are blood of dragon and wolf. Fire and ice. The eye sees you. And it remembers. Jon could not speak. The priest laid a hand on his shoulder. It burned. Not painfully, but deeply. Like warmth returning to a limb long numb. There will come a night when fire must rise from ash, the priest said. And when it does, you must ride it. Jon's mouth was dry. Ride what? The priest smiled. And said nothing. The feast had passed, the musicians' strings silenced, and the echoes of laughter now faded beneath the high arches of Winterfell's great hall. Morning came with a gray hush, and still the smell of roasted venison clung to the flagstones. In Lord Eddard Stark's solar, the fire had burned low in the hearth, but the king of the Seven Kingdoms was sweating beneath his heavy furs. You will take it, Robert said, voice low, gruff from too much wine and too little patience. You'll come south with me, Ned? I'm not asking. I need you. Ned sat across from him with his jaw set, the lines of his face carved deeper by years than any wound ever could. He said nothing for a long moment. Then simply, I cannot. Robert looked up. Not shocked, angry. I didn't ride 1,000 bloody leagues through wind and wolves to hear you say no. And I didn't survive 5 kings' wars and bury my sister in foreign soil just to die in a den of snakes, Ned said, voice soft but unyielding. Robert's hand curled around his goblet. She loved you, Ned. Lyanna. She would have wanted you by my side. She would have wanted peace. The silence hung between them like steel in a scabbard. Robert drank, eyes hard, but not at Ned, at the wall, at the fire, at ghosts neither man dared name. When he finally spoke, it was quieter. I'm surrounded by flatterers, liars, men with daggers for tongues. Varys. Littlefinger. Even my own wife plots with her brother. You're the only one I trust. Ned met his gaze. Then trust me when I say, I will not go. Outside the great hall, in the courtyard slick with thawed snow, Jon Snow watched Robb adjust his collar with some frustration. His brother's formal tunic was stiff with new thread, the silver dire wolf gleaming across his chest. They're Lannisters, Robb muttered. Why do I need to bow to them like they're kings? Jon gave a crooked smile. They think they are. Robb sighed. Father says we must be gracious. Father's not the one whose ribs they broke at the Trident, Jon replied. Before Robb could answer, the inner gate creaked open and 2 figures stepped through, one golden, the other gilded only by wit. Ser Jaime Lannister moved like a man who knew the world belonged to him. His armor gleamed even in Winterfell's dull gray light. Tyrion, by contrast, wore sable and crimson, his cloak dragging like a shadow behind him as he leaned heavily on a cane. Robb straightened. Jon said nothing. Stark boys, Jaime said, eyes like polished brass. Which one of you swings the sword? Or is that the White Beast's job? Ghost, who had been silent until then, padded forward, unblinking. Jaime studied the dire wolf without flinching. Tyrion grinned. Magnificent creature. And quite the guardian, I suspect. Is he yours? Jon nodded. His name is Ghost. The dwarf extended a hand, not toward the wolf, but toward Jon. Tyrion of House Lannister. Disgraced, mocked, and most importantly, unburdened by expectations. Jon hesitated, then shook it. Robb remained stiff, jaw tight. Robb Stark, Jaime said, looking him over. You wear the North well. Robb didn't answer. Tyrion chuckled. You'll have to forgive my brother. He's better at cutting down men than conversation. Better at both than some, Robb muttered. Jaime's eyes flicked toward him like a blade drawn an inch from the sheath, but then he smiled wolfish. I like him. Jon spoke quickly. You've seen much of the realm? Tyrion turned to him. Too much. Enough to know there's precious little justice in it. That's why I read. In books, the hero always wins. Not always, Jon said. True, Tyrion conceded. But in books, the sword is always sharp, and the cause always noble. In life, well, sometimes the knight is sleeping with the queen and the septon's got lice. Jon looked at him more closely. You're not like your brother. No, Tyrion said, raising his brows. He's prettier. Jaime clapped Tyrion on the shoulder. And yet you keep coming south. Someone has to keep the lions honest. The gold-cloaked knight looked again at Ghost, then to Jon. That's a fine animal. He doesn't like liars, Jon said softly. Jaime's smile faded just a fraction. Then Winterfell must be a lonely place. The two turned and walked on, their crimson cloaks catching the cold wind as they vanished into the stone corridors. Robb let out a long breath. Arrogant. Jon said nothing. But he couldn't shake the feeling Tyrion had looked at him longer than necessary, as if trying to read words that had not yet been written. Inside the solar chamber overlooking the Godswood, Sansa sat with hands folded tightly in her lap. Her hair had been brushed until it shone like copper, and her gown, a gift from the Queen's retinue, was the color of summer roses. Across from her, Cersei Lannister poured wine with the poise of a woman who had never dropped a goblet in her life. "You're a sweet thing," the Queen said, handing her the cup. "Far more graceful than your sister." Sansa flushed. "Arya isn't. She isn't always proper. She's a wild little animal," Cersei said lightly, though her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Boys may find her charming now, but men want women who know how to hold their tongue and wear their silk." Sansa looked down at her cup. "I try to be that." "I can see that," Cersei said, sipping. "You could be very beautiful, Sansa, with the right husband." The girl's cheeks colored further. "I hope to wed a brave knight." "Brave," Cersei echoed. "Brave is good, but clever is better." Sansa blinked. "My lady?" The Queen leaned forward just slightly. "One day you may be a queen. Perhaps even Queen of the North if your brother is given the right wife and you the right crown. Remember this, never forget what they owe you." Sansa looked away a little unsure. "Father says loyalty is earned." Cersei's voice was like satin drawn across glass. "And your father lives in a castle built from snow." There was silence for a time. The Queen turned back to her wine. "My son has noticed you," she said idly. Sansa looked up, heart-thudding. "Prince Joffrey? He thinks you have a noble look." Sansa dared not smile. "He's very handsome." Cersei's fingers tightened around her goblet. "He is." Then, after a pause, "You would do well to stay close to him at the feast tonight. Boys are simple creatures. Win their favor while they're young, and they never notice the rains until it's too late." Sansa nodded, eyes wide. "Yes, my lady." The Queen rose, her expression suddenly unreadable. "You may go." Sansa stood, curtsied with shaking hands, and left the chamber as if walking through a dream. Behind her, the Queen stared out across Winterfell's snowy yard, where Ghost paced beside Jon once more, and the Red Priest stood alone in the shadows, watching. The snow had stopped by dusk. A hush lay over Winterfell like a thin shroud, drawn not by death, but by the weight of watching eyes. Servants moved more carefully. Ravens flew more silently. Even the wolves in the Godswood held their howls until the moon had risen clear over the ramparts. Ned Stark stood alone in the castle yard, his breath misting before him, the weight of Robert's words still pressing on his shoulders like mail dipped in stone. He'd refused the handship again in firmer terms. Maester Luwin had looked uneasy. Even Robb had cast uncertain glances when the news reached him. But Ned had made his peace. His place was in the north. His blood ran through Winterfell's stone, and he knew too well what snakes lay waiting beneath the red walls of the south. Footsteps echoed across the courtyard stone. Ned turned just as Ser Jaime Lannister approached, golden, polished, arrogant as ever, his crimson cloak trailing like a spilled banner behind him. "Lord Stark," Jaime said with a smile that held no warmth. "I thought I might find you here. You northern men do so love the cold." "It reminds us what we're made of," Ned replied evenly. "Snow and stone," Jaime said, glancing around. "And stubbornness." Ned gave him a look. "You speak as if that's a weakness." "On the contrary," Jaime said, circling slowly to stand beside him. "It's the only thing that's kept the north from burning over the centuries. But I wonder what happens when the fire comes from within." Ned's eyes narrowed. "Speak plainly, Lannister." Jaime tilted his head. "Your refusal of Robert's offer. It's been whispered to every corner of this castle already. Even the ravens look confused." Ned turned away, staring across the courtyard where boys still sparred beneath Ser Roderick's watchful eye. "I have no place at court." "You're his oldest friend," Jaime said. "His war brother. You saved his life more than once. That should be worth more than snow and stone." "It's not a matter of friendship," Ned said. "No," Jaime agreed. "It's a matter of honor." There was something mocking in his tone. Or perhaps only bitter. Ned said nothing. Jaime walked a few paces ahead, then turned back. "You're not the only one with ghosts, Lord Stark." I'm sure yours have golden hair and lie in their graves with their eyes open. A flicker passed through Jaime's face. Some do, he said, but most still walk. The wind stirred between them. You look at me and see only the man who killed a king, Jaime said, voice low now. And you hate me for it. I look at you and see a man who broke his vows, Ned said sharply. A man who swore to protect his king and then put a blade through his back. I did, Jaime said. And I'd do it again. Ned stared. Jaime's jaw tensed. Do you know what Aerys said as I stood there in the throne room? While Tywin's men sacked the city and your sister bled to death on a bed of roses. Ned's mouth opened, but Jaime cut him off. He said, burn them all. Not the rebels. Not the armies. Everyone. The whole city. Men. Women. Children. His own blood. Ned's brow furrowed. That doesn't excuse. No, it doesn't, Jaime said. But you weren't there. You didn't hear him laugh. You didn't see the wildfire in his eyes. You didn't smell the pyromancer's oils under his nails. The silence that followed was colder than the wind. Ned looked away. Jaime stepped closer, quieter now. You judge me, Lord Stark, and that's your right. But don't confuse the shield for the sword. I did what your honor wouldn't allow, and I've lived with it every day since. Ned's voice was a whisper. You could have told Robert, told the realm, and what would they have heard? Jaime asked bitterly. That the golden boy of House Lannister took it upon himself to play judge and executioner? That I saved King's Landing by treason? He chuckled darkly. No, Lord Stark. They prefer the tale of the Oathbreaker. It's cleaner. They stood in silence, two men forged by war and broken by peace. You could have said something, Ned said again. I did, Jaime replied. But no one listened. Then he turned away. As he walked toward the keep, his voice floated back. Be careful, Stark. The throne doesn't just kill kings. It eats the hands too. Ned remained there long after he was gone, his breath rising like smoke against the winter sky and the weight of old ghosts pressing closer than ever. From the shadows of the battlements, the Red Priest watched and said nothing. The wind had died by the time Jaime Lannister's footsteps faded from earshot. The courtyard returned to stillness, a hush as complete as snowfall in the deep woods. Lord Eddard Stark remained unmoving, gazing past the ramparts as if the horizon might offer absolution. But only the god would lay beyond. And something else, something older, moved in the dark. He heard it before he saw it. A scrape of leather. The faintest crunch of boots on thin ice. Ned turned. The Red Priest stood beneath the shadow of the East Tower. He had not been there a moment ago. His crimson robes did not stir in the breeze, for there was none. His eyes, those strange amber eyes, fixed on Ned as if they saw through every scar, every oath, every truth he had bound himself to. You judge him, the priest said. Ned blinked. Who? The King Lair. The Oathbreaker. The Lion in Gold. Ned narrowed his eyes. I do. And yet he did what your honor could not. The words fell like a drop of blood on snow. Stark clean. Stark cold. Speak plainly, Ned said. But the priest only stepped closer as if proximity might reveal a meaning the words could not. There was a time, he said, voice soft as frost, when fire and ice danced together beneath a broken sky. When the world was young and gods were newly made. But the gods grew jealous. One for light, one for death. They made their war in silence. And men bled for it. Ned frowned. You speak in riddles. Do I? The priest asked, tilting his head. Or is it that truth sounds foreign when spoken outside the tongue of your fathers? What do you want from me? The priest smiled faintly. Nothing. And everything. Ned turned as if to walk away, but the priest's next words froze him mid-step. The man you beheaded, he said softly. The deserter from the Night's Watch. Ned turned back, slowly. What of him? He was not wrong. Ned's brows creased. He broke his vow, and saw the end of the world coming for it. Ned's voice sharpened. He was raving. Was he, the Red Priest asked, stepping beneath the light of a nearby brazier. The flame seemed to bend toward him. He spoke of shadows with blue eyes. Of dead men that walk. Of cold winds that bite deeper than steel. He spoke of fear, Ned said. That's all. And yet, the priest whispered, fear is often a herald. Ned crossed his arms, wary now. You knew him. I know what he saw. Then tell me. The priest's eyes gleamed like embers. North of the wall, something stirs that does not belong. Not to man. Not to death. It walks between, claiming both. It whispers in the voices of lost kin and laughs where no mouth should be. It seeks warmth, not to share, but to devour. Ned's jaw tensed. You mean the others? The priest did not flinch. I mean, what is older than your words for it? Ned stepped closer now, his voice low. If you know of danger to the realm, why speak in riddles? Why not tell the king? Because the king no longer listens. And the realm is not the one in peril. Ned frowned. What do you mean? The red priest turned slowly, gazing toward the crypts of Winterfell as if his vision stretched deeper than stone. There are fires beneath your halls that never went out, he said. Bones that do not sleep. Names that have been lost to the snows of time. But names remember. Blood remembers. Even when men do not. Ned followed his gaze uneasily. You speak as if something has awakened. The priest said nothing for a moment. Then it never truly slept. Ned stepped forward. You talk of shadows and fire and prophecy, but this is the north. We speak plainly. If something threatens my people. The red priest held up a hand, not in protest, but in stillness. The lion hunts for power. The stag grows heavy with regret. The rose clings to summer and the kraken stirs in sullen waters. But the wolf, he turned his gaze back to Ned. The wolf howls because it remembers what the others have forgotten. Ned stiffened. Forgotten what? That winter is not a season, the priest whispered. It is a reckoning. A long silence followed. The wind stirred again. Ned's voice was tight. If you mean to frighten me, you waste your breath. I do not speak to frighten, the red priest said. Only to prepare. Fire and ice have touched this place before, Lord Stark. They will again. He stepped back into the shadow. Watch your sons. Watch the snow. And when the weirwood bleeds in moonlight, do not look away. Then he was gone. Not turned. Not walked. Gone. Ned stood alone in the empty courtyard, the air colder than before, and the silence now far deeper. In the godwood, a raven shrieked once, then fell silent. And in the lowest depths of the crypt, something somewhere stirred. The afternoon sun painted Winterfell's towers in soft hues of bronze and pale gold, but the stones of the old broken tower held no warmth. Moss clung to the crumbling mortar like a wound that would never close. No servants passed this way. No voices echoed here. Even the crows kept their distance. Bran Stark stood at the base of the ruined tower, one boot already planted on a ledge of cracked stone. His hands gripped the ancient groove in the wall where time itself had worn a trail. His breath came quick, not from exertion, but from thrill. He hadn't told anyone he was climbing again. Maester Luwin had warned him. Robb had warned him. Old Nan had wept. But Bran was a Stark, and the walls of Winterfell had always called to him. They whispered things from their heights, promises of wind and sky and stories no one else could see. And this tower this forgotten relic of a time before Robert's rebellion had always beckoned more than any other. He placed his foot higher. Another stone. Another pull. The cold bit his fingers. The breeze kissed his face. Higher and higher. Then, Brandon Stark. A voice quiet and warm like fire behind snow. Bran froze. He looked down, and there, standing in the shadow of the wall, was the red priest. His robes were still untouched by wind. His eyes glowed faintly like embers under ash. Bran frowned. You're not supposed to be here. Neither are you, the priest said, tone gentle. Bran didn't move. I'm not hurting anything. Not yet, the priest agreed. I can climb it, Bran insisted. I've climbed higher. I do not doubt it. Bran hesitated, fingers clenched against the stone. Then why stop me? The priest stepped forward, not close, just enough that his voice did not have to carry. Because the wind is shifting, and the eagle must not break its wings before the storm. Bran blinked. What? The priest smiled faintly. There is a door in your mind, Bran Stark. A door that has not yet opened. If you climb today, it may never open at all. Bran looked upward. He'd nearly reached the small opening where the tower wall had crumbled, where no one ever went. He could already feel the pull of the height. The world would be small from up there. He would be bigger, stronger. I don't understand, he said. You will, the priest replied. But only if you choose to walk instead of climb. Bran glanced down. I don't want to walk. Some of the strongest wings grow from broken legs, the red priest said. But not today. Bran bit his lip. He looked once more to the crumbled ledge above. Somewhere beyond that gap, two figures moved behind stone walls. A lion, a queen, a secret that could end lives, topple kingdoms, and throw the world into chaos. But Bran did not see them, because he let go. He climbed down slowly, fingers stiff with cold, jaw clenched with disappointment. He dropped the last few feet to the ground and stood in silence. The priest nodded once. Good, he said. The flame is not ready to be lit. Bran kicked the dirt. You speak like old Nan's stories. She has seen more than most. Bran narrowed his eyes. Will I ever climb it? Perhaps, the priest said. Perhaps not. But your eyes will rise higher than this tower ever reached. He began to walk away. Bran called after him. Why do you care what I do? The red priest stopped. He turned only part way. Because the dragon sleeps, he said. And when he wakes, he will need a raven. Then he vanished into the shadows between stones. Bran stood alone by the tower, watching the empty window above. A raven passed overhead with a shriek, wings black against the sun. And in a room high above the courtyard, behind a thick stone wall, Jaime Lannister pulled away from Cersei with a scowl. I thought I heard something. She smoothed her gown, golden hair tangled. There's no one there. He frowned, walking toward the window. But outside, there was no boy. No climber. Just the tower and wind and the red shadow already gone. The fire pit crackled in the corner of the stable's courtyard, casting flickers of orange across the cobbled ground. The sky above was ink-dark and wide, scattered with stars as sharp as broken glass. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled once, then fell silent. Jon Snow sat on an overturned barrel near the flames, cloak drawn tightly over his shoulders. Robb Stark leaned against a nearby post, arms crossed, half listening as his breath steamed in the cold. Theon Greyjoy was throwing knives at a hay target nailed crookedly to the stable wall, missing one out of every 3 throws but pretending not to care. And Tyrion Lannister sat cross-legged on a crate, a skin of wine dangling from one hand. They were, in that moment, not princes, not hostages, not bastards, nor lions. Just 4 young men born into an old world that expected too much of them too soon. You're all far too quiet, Tyrion said, taking another swig. It's unnatural. We're thinking, Theon muttered, retrieving his last blade from the hay. Gods forbid, Tyrion quipped. What happens when wolves think too much? Do they forget how to bite? Robb arched a brow. We still remember. That's a comfort, Tyrion said. Though it's usually lions who teach wolves to keep their teeth bared. Jon glanced at him. Are you trying to provoke us? Tyrion grinned. No. Provoking would involve more sarcasm and a greater supply of wine. He passed the skin to Jon, who took it reluctantly. I don't drink much, Jon said. Then you'll learn. Jon took a sip and coughed. Theon laughed. Careful, Tyrion said, it's Dornish. Strong enough to make you think your thoughts are important. Robb cracked a smile. That would explain your confidence. Tyrion held up a hand. Touché, Stark. You're not as grim as your father. I try. Try harder. Theon stepped in. You want grim? Talk to Snow here. He broods more than a widow in mourning. Jon gave a tired sigh. I'm not brooding. I'm just thinking. Theon flopped onto a bench. Then think out loud for once. Jon was silent for a moment, then asked, what do you think the world expects from us? Tyrion raised an eyebrow. The world expects what it always does, obedience, blood, and an early death. Robb folded his arms. I think it expects us to fix what our fathers broke. Ah, Tyrion said, nodding. The noble son. Must be exhausting. Robb shrugged. It's not about being noble. It's about doing what's right. Tyrion gave him a look. And how do you know what that is? Robb hesitated. Jon answered for him. You know. In your gut. Even if it's hard. You just know. Tyrion studied Jon's face. You sound like your father. I hope so, Jon said softly. Theon laughed, bitter and sharp. I never knew mine. Robb glanced at him. He's not dead. No, Theon said, but he might as well be. Balon Greyjoy doesn't love anything he didn't squeeze out of his own arse. That drew a chuckle from Tyrion. Sorry, Theon muttered more quietly. It's the wine. Jon spoke after a pause. Does he write you? Theon looked down. Once. A few years ago. Said I'd grow soft among the wolves. That I'd forgotten the salt. Robb frowned. That's not true. Theon's voice was flat. Maybe it is. Tyrion swirled the wine. We're all sons of ghosts in our own way. Your father lives in a castle of silence, Theon. Jon's lives in another man's shadow. And mine, well, he casts a longer one than most. Jon looked at him. Do you hate him? Tyrion smiled thinly. I admire him. The way a rabbit admires a hawk. Your brother doesn't seem to admire him, Robb said. Tyrion's laugh was low and knowing. Jaime is complicated. Theon scoffed. He doesn't look complicated. He looks like he trims his beard with a mirror made of gold. And yet, Tyrion said, he's a killer, a knight, a whisperer, a brother, and a prisoner in his own armor, all at once. There was silence for a time. Then Robb asked, do you ever wish you were born elsewhere? To someone else? Jon stared into the fire. Every day. Theon didn't answer, but his eyes said yes. Tyrion took a long sip. "No," he said finally. "If I were someone else, I'd have to meet me." That made Robb laugh. Tyrion looked at Jon. "You know, Snow, you're an interesting puzzle." Jon blinked. "Why?" "You carry your father's face, but not his name. You wear the North like armor, but you burn like someone who knows exile." Jon didn't answer. Tyrion leaned forward. "Do you ever wonder why your father never told you about your mother?" Jon's voice was a whisper. All the time. Tyrion's gaze lingered on him a little longer, then shifted to the stars. "Then keep wondering. There are secrets buried deeper than roots in this place." "Spoken like the Red Priest," Robb said quietly. Tyrion turned. "Ah, yes. The Lord of Light's mute poet. What do you make of him?" Jon hesitated. "I think he sees too much." Tyrion nodded. "And says too little." "I saw him talking to Bran," Robb said. "Yesterday. Bran didn't climb the tower after that." Jon looked at him. "He didn't." Robb shook his head. "He said the priest told him not to." Theon scoffed. "Since when do Starks listen to fire worshippers?" Robb didn't respond. Tyrion leaned back on the crate. "There's something strange about that one. He doesn't eat, barely sleeps, and somehow he's in every shadow." "Maybe he's a spy," Theon said. "Maybe," Tyrion said, "but for whom?" They all went quiet again. Above them, the moon hung low and pale. Then Jon said, "If you could change one thing, one moment, what would it be?" The question settled like snow. Theon tossed his knife in the air and caught it. "I'd never have been taken as a ward." Robb frowned. "You don't mean that." "I do," Theon said, "because I don't know who I am anymore." Tyrion answered next. "I'd have been born tall." That drew a reluctant smile. Robb thought for a long time. "I'd have asked my father to teach me more about the past. He always says we must remember, but he never tells the stories." They all looked at Jon. He stared into the fire. "I'd ask him the truth." No one asked what he meant. They sat there as the fire hissed and snapped. For young men on the edge of too many futures, none of which would ever be kind. And in a tower far above, the Red Priest stood in silence, gazing down at them through a cracked window. The flames flickered behind his eyes. Mist clung to the courtyards and parapets, a pale veil over Winterfell's stone face. From the barracks came the sound of practice swords clashing. Smoke curled lazily from the smithy chimneys. Somewhere deep in the Godswood, wolves were howling. But inside the solar of the Lord of Winterfell, the air was warmer, not from hearthfire, but from the rising heat between two old friends divided by duty. Robert Baratheon stood at the window, one hand braced against the frame, his breath fogging the leaded glass. His beard was damp from the washbasin. His eyes were still bloodshot from drink. He did not turn when Ned entered. "I was hoping," Robert said, "that a night's sleep would bring you to your senses." Ned closed the door behind him, calmly, firmly. "It hasn't." Robert turned now. "7 hells, Ned. Must I kneel?" "I would rather you didn't," Ned said flatly. The king approached, boots echoing on the stone. "You're not hearing me. I've got Varys and Littlefinger whispering poison into my ear. A Lannister bitch for a queen. My son is a golden-haired viper I can barely recognize. I need you." Ned met his eyes without flinching. "And the North needs me." Robert threw up his arms. "The North needs a warden. Not a ghost chasing shadows." "They aren't shadows," Ned said, stepping forward. "Not anymore." Robert squinted. "You're starting to sound like that red wraith your maester keeps glaring at." "I don't trust him either," Ned said. "But even liars can speak truths, especially when they match other signs." Robert laughed without humor. "Signs? Now it's prophecy." Ned moved to the map table, laid his hand flat against it. "There's been word from the hill clans east of Last Hearth. Wildling tribes stirring in numbers not seen in a generation. Towns near the Bay of Seals report villages burned, raided, and abandoned without a trace. Not just by men." Robert's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "They found bones," Ned said. "Scorched black. Not hacked by steel, but melted." Robert stared. "You're not saying." "And farther still," Ned interrupted, voice low, steady, "there's rumor from the coast. From crabbers and cliff dwellers. Men who can't read but know the stars. They say a shadow passed over the sea. One large enough to swallow the sun." Robert said nothing. I wouldn't have believed it, Ned went on. Not until the Red Priest arrived. Not until Bran told me about his dream. Robert slowly sank into the nearest chair. A dream, Ned nodded. He said a great winged beast slept beneath the world, that it opened its eye beneath our crypts. Robert exhaled, deeply. Madness, perhaps, Ned allowed. But the madness is spreading. Even the small folk whisper it now, that a dragon has returned. Robert laughed again, but weaker this time. A dragon? That would make Viserys the happiest fool in the realm. It wasn't silver, Ned said. They say it was black. Black as pitch, as big as a mountain. Breathing fire that left no bones behind. Robert blinked. Balerion, that's the name they used. For a long time, Robert said nothing. He rubbed his hand down his face, suddenly looking older than Ned had ever seen him. The last dragon died before we were born, Robert muttered. Or we were told it did, Ned said. Robert looked up. You truly believe this? I believe that something is changing, Ned said. That old things are waking. That the wall isn't as far away as it used to be. Robert's fingers tapped against the armrest. And what would you have me do? Let the realm slide into chaos while you sit here nursing stories? I would have you listen, Ned said sharply. Listen before it's too late. Before your son is crowned. Before your enemies gather. Before fire and ice tear the world apart again. Robert's face twisted. You sound like Stannis. Or worse, like that fire witch. I sound like a man who sees the storm coming. They stared at one another for a long moment. Two boys grown into men who had survived war and who now saw different wars ahead. Finally, Robert leaned back and closed his eyes. You've always been the good one, Ned. Even when it was hard. I envy you that. I don't want your crown, Ned said. I never did. Robert chuckled. I still closed. That's why you should have worn it. Then, after a pause. If I leave without you, Cersei will smell weakness. Then you must be strong without me. And what of your son? Rob? He will lead the North in my stead. And your bastard? Ned looked away. He has his own path. Robert opened his eyes again. Is it true? What the priest said, that the dead walk again in the North? Ned's voice was quiet. I don't know, but I intend to find out. Robert stood slowly, the weight of decision settling over him like armor he hadn't worn in years. Then God's help us both, he said. Ned gave a faint nod. Let's hope they're listening. They parted without another word. As Robert passed down the stair toward his guards, his gait was heavier. As if some piece of him remained behind in that stone room, the piece that remembered Lyanna. The piece that still believed Ned would always follow. In the shadows above, beyond torchlight and banners, the Red Priest stood silently in the rafters, unseen. He watched them both go, then turned to the hearth, where the fire whispered to no one but him. The godwood was quiet that night. Too quiet. Snow had fallen again, soft and dry, dusting the old stones like powder from the bones of giants. The pool at the heart tree's roots had frozen into glass. The red leaves of the weirwood stirred gently even though there was no wind. The Red Priest knelt in silence, eyes closed. His robe soaked up the stillness like wick drawing oil. Before him, in a bowl of carved ashwood, fire burned. But the flames did not flicker naturally. They moved like serpents, sinuous, deliberate, aware. He had prepared the ritual in silence, drawing lines in the dirt with crushed bone and black salt, taken from the frost-crusted cliffs east of White Harbor. He'd burned myrrh and something rarer, scale, ground fine, drawn from a hidden pouch sewn into his robes. Few would recognize what it was. Fewer still would dare use it. Now he opened his eyes. The fire leapt. And he saw. He saw snow falling on a shattered tower. He saw the wall, not whole, but cracked. He saw a throne of ice, no, of bone, rising where Winterfell had once stood. He saw wolves howling as the sky burned black. He saw a queen of ash with blood on her lips. He saw a boy with no eyes walking through time. He saw a sword burning in darkness, held by no hand at all. He saw a dragon, vast, ancient, terrible, its wings so wide they eclipsed the moon. Not golden, not silver, but black as the void between stars. The fire that poured from its throat turned forests to wastelands, rivers to steam. And upon its back, he could not see the rider. The image shuddered, broke apart. The fire screamed, not with wind, not with wood, but truly screamed as if the very thing within it tried to claw its way free. The priest gripped the edges of the bowl as light bled from the coals. His eyes glowed in the flickering haze. And then, all at once, silence. The flame went out, and the priest whispered to no one, "He wakes. It began in salt pans, a small harbor town clinging to the riverlands like a barnacle half forgotten even by maps. A place of fishmongers and drunks, of wives who cursed the sea and children who never learned to swim. But that night, they all saw it. The sky turned gold before it turned black. A low sound rolled in from the sea, not a wave, not a storm, but a roar. A deep, ancient roar that set every dog howling. Lights appeared over the eastern horizon. Not stars. Not ships. Fire. Fishermen dragged their nets onto shore and fell to their knees. A widow screamed of doom. An old sailor wet himself. A drunken hedge knight dropped his flask and stared upward, mouth wide. The creature came out of the fog without warning. Massive. Winged. Black. It did not soar. It swept like a storm cloud with bones, wind screaming beneath its wings. Its eyes glowed red. Its breath scorched the shore. No buildings burned. It did not attack. It did not speak. It simply passed. One woman fell into the sand, babbling. She cried out a name she could not have known. Balerion. When it vanished into the hills, the fire in the clouds died with it. And for 3 days afterward, the fish would not return to the bay. A raven was sent to Old Town, another to King's Landing. One man swore he saw the sigil of House Targaryen burned into the sky. But when a maester arrived to investigate, he found only frightened peasants and a broken piece of stone near the coast, melted as though touched by lightning or gods. A black scale, large as a man's palm, lay in the sand. It was warm. In the days that followed, the rumors reached Winterfell like slow-moving thunder. First from a raven, then from a traveling merchant, then from a sworn sword returning from Deepwood Motte, whose horse nearly died of fright crossing the Weeping Bay. Each story was worse than the last. Jon heard them whispered in the yard. Dragon. Wings. Fire without flame. Balerion. Even Arya spoke of it, wide-eyed and thrilled. But it was Robb who brought the news to Lord Stark's table, quiet, solemn. "It's spreading, father," he said. "People are afraid." Ned said nothing. Later that night, he stood atop the battlements alone, watching the North Star flicker. He didn't turn when the Red Priest approached behind him. "I saw it," the priest said. "In the fire." "Then it's true. It is more than true. It is old. Older than dragons. Older than Targaryens. Older than thrones." Ned turned, eyes hard. "Why now?" "Because something woke him." "Who?" The priest was quiet for a long time. Then he whispered, "The boy." Ned's breath caught. "Jon?" The priest's eyes did not waver. "You call him Snow, but the fire knows his blood." A gust of wind rose over Winterfell's towers, scattering cinders into the sky like stars ripped from their place. Far to the south, Balerion flew again. The courtyard echoed with the hammer of boots. King Robert paced like a caged bull beneath Winterfell's high towers, his cloak whipping in the sharp wind. The gray light of dawn had yet to burn off the cold mist clinging to the walls, but Robert's temper burned brighter than any fire. "I should drag you south myself," he roared, voice shaking the frost from the stone. "You stubborn, bloody northerner. You'd let the realm rot while you hide among wolves and snow." Ned Stark stood unmoving, calm beneath the storm. "I will not abandon the North." "You would abandon me," Robert shouted. "You would turn your back on everything we built." He was still shouting when the sound of hooves interrupted. A rider galloped hard through the outer gate, his horse frothing at the mouth, lathered and near-spent. The man barely dismounted before falling to his knees. "Your Grace," he cried. "A town, south of the neck. Gods preserve us." "It's gone." Robert spun. "Gone? What do you mean, gone?" The man's lips trembled. "Torrens Square. It's ash. Nothing remains but stone, slag, and bone." Ned's breath caught. "That's less than 2 days' ride." "A dragon," the messenger gasped. "A black beast, huge as a mountain. Fire like red glass. Eyes like coals from the god's own forge." Robert froze. "Dragon." The man nodded frantically. "It wasn't like the tales. Bigger. Older. It melted stone. It turned a stone keep into cinders in seconds. The fire wasn't normal. It was red. Not just heat. Magic. Everything burns when it touches it. Everything." There was a long pause. Then Robert growled, "Jaime." The Kingslayer appeared from the stable entrance, adjusting the clasp on his golden cloak. "I heard. Gather 200 of our best," Robert barked. "Armed. Horses fed and ready in an hour. We ride." Ned stepped forward. "You shouldn't go yourself. If it's true." "I'm the Bloody King," Robert snapped. "I won't sit on my fat arse while my people are burned alive." You're coming too. Robb stepped beside his father. So am I. Jon, silent until now, spoke quietly. Let me ride. Robert looked him over. Your father might object. He's not my father. Ned looked sharply at him but said nothing. Jaime gave a crooked smile. A Stark bastard and a royal brat in the same saddle line. Wonderful. Robert grunted. Then let's ride. They rode hard and fast. 200 mounted men, lords and guards, young and old, all cloaked in steel and silence. Wolves of House Stark, lions of Lannister, crown stag and sword, all bound for the same blackened horizon. The sky remained gray as slate, the wind bitter and tense. Ned rode at Robert's side, Robb beside Jon. Jaime farther back, his golden hair glinting beneath his helm. The men spoke little on the road. They reached Torrhen's Square by dusk, or what remained of it. Smoke still curled from the earth. Where once had stood stone walls and a proud keep, there was only ruin. The earth itself looked burned, warped, like glass hammered into the shape of a crater. The buildings were gone. Foundations gone. Not even timbers remained. Just cinders. Even the river nearby had boiled away. Trees stood blackened a mile out, still smoldering. Men dismounted in silence. Gods, Robb muttered. What could do this? Jon crouched beside a melted ring of stone. It had once been part of a well. Now it was fused into the ground like a child's clay toy. Jaime rode slowly through what had been the town square. His horse skittered at the scent, ash, blood, and something older. Only one building still stood, a low cellar door partially buried in soot. The guards pried it open and found a man inside. He was burned along one side, face blistered and skin cracked. His eyes stared into nothing. He's the only one, a Stark guard said. The only living soul. Robert knelt before him. What happened here? He demanded. Speak, man. Who did this? The man's lips cracked. His tongue was scorched. His voice came out like crushed gravel. Balerion. Robert paled. What? It was him, the man rasped. Balerion, but not like in the stories. Bigger. Wings like thunder. Eyes red as hellfire. Fire that melted stone. Not heat. Not normal. It screamed. He began to sob. It screamed when it breathed, like it was in pain, like it remembered. Jaime leaned forward, eyes sharp. It burned the keep, turned it to ash, just looked at it and it fell apart. Fire that wasn't fire. Curse. A wrath. Black wings. Red fire. He's back. Robert rose slowly. Ned said nothing. Jon looked out at the horizon where the mountains loomed in shadow. His hand rested on Ghost's neck. The direwolf was growling low, ears flat, fur bristling. The air smelled wrong. Jaime turned to Robert. What now? Robert's face was unreadable. We ride back. Double pace. Ned stepped forward. We can't outrun it. We're not going to outrun it, Robert said. We're going to wake the realm. He looked to Ned. I still need a hand. Ned did not respond. Robert's voice dropped. If we don't stand together, this thing will burn everything. Thrones, keeps, gods and kings alike. Jon turned slowly. And if it's not alone? They all looked to him. He wasn't smiling. The gates of Winterfell groaned open beneath the weight of snow and steel. The riders entered as dusk bled into night, torches held aloft, their faces grim and gray with ash. Even the horses looked changed, quieter, eyes wide, hooves dragging as though they remembered the scorched land behind them. Cersei stood waiting beneath the portcullis, her golden high. Are bound tightly, lips pale, fingers clenched beneath silken gloves. Beside her stood Catelyn Stark, flanked by Maester Luwin and a ring of guards. Their eyes searched the returning host with breathless urgency. When they saw the banners intact and the king's form riding upright, they exhaled as if the cold itself had loosened its grip. But the relief didn't last. Where in the seven hells have you been? Cersei hissed, rushing forward as Robert dismounted. You ride south without a word, dragging half the castle guard with you. I was investigating a massacre, Robert snapped, swinging down from his saddle. One that left nothing behind but slag and stories. You should have told me. You wouldn't have believed me. I am your queen, and yet you know nothing of your realm. Robert roared. Enough, Catelyn Stark interjected, stepping between them. If there's danger near our lands, we all deserve to know. Robert turned to her, eyes fierce. Then know this. Your son nearly rode into the mouth of a dragon. Catelyn paled. Robb and Jon entered the courtyard behind the column, their faces dark with soot and weariness. Ghosts slinked beside them, ears twitching. Men cleared a path as they passed. Robb caught his mother's eye. "We're fine." "You are not," she said, grasping his face, then his shoulders. "You've been burned, both of you." Jon stepped aside, wordless. Cersei turned on him. "And what was he doing there?" "Saving your husband's arse," Theon muttered behind her. The queen's gaze could have carved stone. But Robb raised his voice. "The town is gone. Torrance Square is gone. Ask your guards. Ask the men. Stone melted to glass. Trees burned to ash. All from the sky. Drag on fire." Catelyn whispered. "Worse," Jon said. The courtyard fell quiet. And then the Red Priest appeared. He moved like smoke from between two pillars, his crimson robes trailing softly across the stone. The flames from the torches danced as he passed, though there was no wind. All eyes turned to him. Jon stepped forward. "What do you know of this dragon?" he asked. The priest looked at him, eyes aglow with amber. But before he could speak, another voice cut the night in half. "No one," it said, rich and low, "can truly know the will of the Lord of Light." All heads turned. At the far end of the courtyard, near the gate, a woman in scarlet stood as if conjured from the dark itself. Tall, radiant, with red hair that glowed like flame beneath the torchlight. Her eyes were molten gold. Her presence stilled the air. Even the wolves went silent. She stepped forward slowly, the firelight licking her robes, her expression unreadable. "I am Melisandre," she said. "Of Askai." The Red Priest said nothing, only watched her. Cersei's eyes narrowed. "Another one? Have we become a haven for fanatics now?" Melisandre didn't even glance at her. Her gaze remained fixed on Jon. "You saw it," she said softly. "The shadow in the sky. The black flame. The waking beast." Jon hesitated. "Yes." She smiled. "Then the hour is near." "What hour?" Robb asked. Melisandre turned slowly. "The hour of reckoning. The song of fire rising to meet the cold." Ned approached now, having just dismounted, his voice firm. "If you've come to speak in riddles." "I speak in truth," she said. "Your gods are old. Dead. Your walls are high, but not high enough. The north is not safe." "The north is always ready," Ned answered. She looked at him with something like pity. "You prepare for men. What's coming is older than men." Jon stepped closer. "Do you know what it is?" "The dragon?" "I know what rides its back," she said. "I have seen it in flame. A shadow given wing. A fire made flesh." "Who?" Jon asked. Melisandre tilted her head. "The one who wakes the sleepers." The Red Priest finally spoke. "Enough." His voice was deeper than before, resonant. "This is not your fire to tend, Lady of Ash." She turned to him. "You fear the truth. I fear false prophets. Then you fear yourself." They stared at one another across the firelit courtyard. Two priests of the same god, cast from different embers. The silence between them cracked with unseen heat. Jon felt it in his chest. A thrum, pressure, presence. Catelyn stepped protectively in front of Robb. Cersei scoffed. "Enough of this nonsense. I will not suffer another witch." "She speaks true," a voice said quietly. It was Maester Luwin. All turned. He stepped from the archway with a scroll in his hand. "Reports from the east. Salt pans, maiden pool, even the bloody gate. They've all seen it." He looked up. The dragon is real. Night had fallen fully over Winterfell. The courtyard had emptied. The banners hung still in the absence of wind, and the stars overhead glimmered faintly through a veil of passing cloud. Only a few torches remained lit along the stone walls, their flickers casting long, uneasy shadows. The godwood was quiet, the towers asleep, but two figures stood beneath the eastern archway, speaking in murmurs. Jon Snow and Melisandre. He had followed her after the confrontation in the courtyard. Not by instruction, but by pull. Something about her words had wrapped around his thoughts like frostbite in his lungs. She stood now by the fire brazier near the stables, her crimson robes alive in the torchlight, her golden eyes studying him with something between curiosity and hunger. "You saw it," she said, voice velvet smooth. "Tell me what you saw." Jon crossed his arms, watching her carefully. Ghost sat at his side, ears flat, red eyes narrowed. "I didn't see much," Jon said. "Just fire, black wings, and fear." Melisandre stepped closer. "Fear is good. Fear is honest. The flames speak clearest when we are afraid." Jon frowned. "Is that why you serve your god? Fear?" "I serve because I was chosen," she said. "We are all chosen, Jon Snow." The fire watches. The fire remembers. It marked you before you were born. John stiffened. What do you mean? Melisandre's voice lowered. You are of both ice and fire. The wolf in winter. The spark in the dark. You are the key the flame waits to awaken. He took a step back. I'm no one. Her lips curved almost sadly. All heroes say that. Before they rise. Before John could reply, a voice broke the stillness behind them. John? Both turned. Bran stood barefoot on the stone, his tunic askew, hair wild from sleep. His eyes were wide, not in childish wonder, but in something older. Deeper. He looked as though he'd seen death walk. John moved to him quickly. Bran? What is it? Bran swallowed hard. I had a dream. Melisandre watched with keen interest. John knelt. You're shaking. What did you see? Bran looked past him, straight into the priestess's eyes. I was in the crypts. John stiffened. Bran's voice came slow and strange, almost trance-like. But the statues weren't still. They moved. They spoke. The old kings, they told me to listen. That winter was lying. That fire was not safe. John touched his shoulder. Bran. I heard wings, Brent said. Black wings. They blocked out the moon. Then something screamed, but not like an animal. Like it had forgotten what it was. He looked up at John, suddenly close to tears. It said your name. The silence was absolute. John's breath caught. Melisandre took a single step forward. The dragon calls to its rider. John stood slowly. I don't have dragons. Not yet, she said. Bran shook his head. It wasn't a dragon that spoke. It was the thing beneath the dragon. The thing that wears it like armor. Even Melisandre blinked at that. The fire screamed, Bran whispered. And it wasn't a beast. It was a prison. A shell. Like a cage made of bones and wings. John was pale now. You were dreaming. I don't think I was, Bran said. I think it was dreaming through me. Melisandre whispered something in Balerion, low, too soft to hear. When she raised her eyes, there was something like reverence there. Or fear. John drew Bran close, but his own heart was thudding against his ribs. What does it mean? He asked, barely louder than a breath. Melisandre's voice was hoarse. It means the dragon is not alone. The halls of Winterfell were quiet in the hours before dawn. The fires had been banked, the servants gone to rest. Even the ravens in the rookery had fallen silent, tucked beneath wing. Yet in the eastern wing of the keep, beyond the old stairwell and behind a door of oak and iron, Eddard Stark stood alone, sharpening ice. The greatsword hissed softly as he drew the whetstone across its edge. It was a sound he knew well, one that calmed him in ways words never could. But tonight it brought no comfort. The dreams had returned. Of crypts. Of falling snow. Of a shadow on wings that cried out in his son's voice. He didn't look up when he heard the door open behind him. He already knew who it was. Melisandre stepped through the threshold without announcement. Her robes trailing like a flame drawn slow through ash. The brazier in the corner flared softly as she passed. Ned did not turn. I don't remember sending for you, he said quietly. You didn't. He set the whetstone aside and laid ice flat upon the table. The torchlight caught along its length like silver moonlight. What do you want? He asked. She stepped closer, slowly. To speak plainly. Ned finally turned to face her. His eyes were hard and gray. Then do it. Melisandre studied him. The solemn lines of his face. The iron in his posture. You carry burdens most men would crumble beneath. But there is one truth you've buried so deep. Even the gods cannot hear it. Ned's jaw tensed. Speak your riddle and be gone. Her voice dropped to a whisper. You've hidden him well. But fire sees through stone. He said nothing. She took another step. He is not your son. Not truly. Ned's fingers curled around the edge of the table. Melisandre's golden eyes glowed in the firelight. So no one knows that he is the prince who was promised. Silence swallowed the room. The words hung in the air like blood in snow, irreversible. Ned's voice was rough. You speak lies. I speak what the flames showed me. You saw nothing, he growled. You see what you want to see. I saw a child born in smoke and blood beneath a dying star. I saw his mother weep in her last breath. I saw you take him, cloak him, and seal the truth behind honor. She moved now slowly around the edge of the table. I saw you name him Snow. But he is not yours. Ned's hand went to the hilt of ice, not to draw, but to ground himself. Be careful what you say, witch. Her voice softened. You think you do this to protect him, but you've only hidden him from what he is. From what he must become. Ned stared at her. And what is that? The light in the long night, she whispered. The fire reborn. Azor Ahai in flesh again. Ned shook his head. He's a boy. He is the weapon. He's my blood. Melisandre's gaze did not waver. Then why do you fear the truth? Because truth has teeth, Ned snapped. It devours. It does not save. They stood in silence again. She turned, walking to the brazier, trailing fingers over its rim. The flame bent toward her touch. The dead are coming, Lord Stark, she said. Not just dragons. Not just kings. But things older than winter. Your walls will not save you. Your armies will not stand. Only the flame. Ned said nothing. You will have to choose, she said at last. Your vow or the realm. He looked down at ice. I've made the choice once. And you may have to again. Melisandre stepped back into the shadows. Her voice, soft as smoke, lingered in the air. He must be told who he is. Or the fire will burn him blind. Then she was gone, leaving Ned alone with the sword and the weight of a name he had never dared to speak.